Hi, it's Marco Pelosi III. In the spring of 2012, I had the opportunity to address a group of 200 board-certified community gynecologists and academicians curious about the practice of aesthetics. I took them on a guided tour of the processes that I used to train myself in various cosmetic procedures where no true guidelines existed. We explored the learning process, the mastery process, and the metrics of success. They expected nothing useful. To their surprise, they left enlightened. This is the complete and unedited version of that presentation.
I'm going to address basically what's involved in learning procedures, what kinds of background amount of experience is needed on a procedure by procedure basis in cosmetics. In the way of disclosure, I own a company that teaches doctors cosmetic procedures. All right, so after this, you should be able to describe the common procedures, to understand what kind of training is required, and describe the components of a cosmetic practice, which is more than just the doctor with a knowledge base. All right, it's no surprise that everyone wants to look fitter, younger, healthier, and this is something that has grabbed the global consciousness now that everybody seems to be connected on Facebook and all of the other social media. So what's popular in New Jersey is popular on the West Coast. What's popular on the West Coast is popular overseas. And the entire world has sort of gotten on board with this desire to look better. There are various numbers put out by various organizations, and they tend to poll the ENT, the derm, and the plastic surgeon, who were the traditional providers of cosmetic procedures for many years. And those numbers have given us something along the lines of 14 million cosmetic procedures performed last year by survey respondents only in those three specialties. And most people who are familiar with cosmetic procedures know the majority of procedures are non-surgical, and the majority fall outside of this 14 million. So there's a huge number of women and men going for cosmetic procedures. People try to get into the reasons why people undergo these procedures. Is it society creating this perfect model of an emaciated woman? Is it human nature for humans to look as fertile as possible? We're never going to answer that in a 15-minute lecture. We're going to not challenge it, other than to understand that this drive for cosmetic procedures is happening. And there has never been a time in history when access to information about these procedures and access to these procedures has been greater. So some of the motivators, the driving forces, the baby boomer generation wants to look young, wants to stay in control of all aspects of their life. And the looks of things are part of what they want to control. The divorce rates are high, and people tend to want to look as good as possible if they're going to be in a new relationship. The media feeds off of this. It's human nature. It sells. People love to hear about cosmetics, beauty, sex. And the technology has made it easier to achieve these goals in ways that are not as expensive, and not as painful, and not fraught with the long recoveries of the traditional older procedures. The minimally invasive mindset has invaded all aspects of medical health care. And this, of course, is all catalyzed by social media. Cosmetic surgery in the modern era, in the last century, originated with dentists and ear, nose, and throat, head and neck surgeons trying to repair the trauma from World War I. This was the first war where the technology for the warfare side outpaced the tactics. So there was a lot of trench warfare. So a lot of the bodies were not damaged in the trenches, but the faces were. There were survivors experiencing defects that couldn't be fixed with existing techniques. So out of World War I, technologies developed in cosmetic procedures and reconstructive procedures, and that paved the way for the organization of plastic surgery as a distinct specialty in the late 1920s. From there, general surgeons, gynecologists, dermatologists, all surgical specialists use cosmetic surgical techniques to one degree or another in their respective specialties, and many of these specialists branch out into cosmetic procedures. When I started cosmetic surgery, I started with liposuction in 1998. There were approximately 50 gynecologists in the country. As far as numbers go, these numbers came from the American Academy of Cosmetic Surgery. There were 50 members that were gynecologists in 1998. And currently, there are over 2,000 doctors performing cosmetic procedures that we can count, by my counts and by the counts of the American Academy of Cosmetic Surgery, in just over a decade. So the ball is rolling, and the question now is not should the gynecologist get into the cosmetic arena, but what should the individual gynecologist who wishes to get into the cosmetic arena do, which is what we're going to discuss in more detail. The driving forces are a more degree of a control. There's no middleman. There is no third party between the patient and the surgeon in the cosmetic world. It's a one-on-one relationship like the old doctor-patient relationship. The scheduling of non-emergent procedures doesn't involve much stress. It doesn't happen at 3 in the morning trying to assemble a team of whoever happens to be around. Everything is at a different pace. Safety is encouraged by picking patients. In the cosmetic world, you pick the patient for the procedure, not like in the regular medical world where you treat all comers and fix them as best you can. And in the era of managed care and Medicare, threatened to be slashed every other day, this is a reliable cash flow, which will help to balance practices that are having trouble. The majority of the cosmetic market is focused on the skin and the face. It's about 75% of those 14 million procedures that you saw. And everything else makes up a smaller portion. But the majority of the revenue is in that everything else section, the surgical procedures of the body. So training requires a couple of things. It's nice to say, we have motivation and that's going to get us through. But that's not enough. You need a strategy, you need a plan, something that has been tested in other arenas to be able to learn something on the same level that you learn other procedures in your specialty. This is what ACOG has said repeatedly. Education, training, and experience are the hallmarks of credentialing, are the hallmarks of competence. The American Board of Medical Specialties and the AMA say the same thing. And they have never wavered from this since the beginning when these organizations were formed. So this is nothing new. It's not a surprise. It's the basic elements of education. So if we're going to put numbers on these things, what do we use as far as numbers? And what do the numbers really mean? There's an old story of a businessman just starting out who has no idea of how to hire an accountant. So he asks an old-timer, "How do I hire an accountant?" He said, "Just ask him how much 2 and 2 is." So he gets 3 different men. Then he asks the first one, "How much is 2 and 2?" The first accountant says 2 and 2 is 4. The second accountant says, "Well, it depends. Do you have 2 apples, 2 oranges? You might have 2 of each." The third accountant says, "Whatever you want it to be." So when we look at numbers, we have to take into account, what do these numbers mean? Where do we get them from? And can we rely on these numbers? So I'm going to throw out some numbers. I don't know if they're the right numbers, but based on my experience, they're the best numbers that I can come up with. So let's look at the learning process. Let's see how people actually learn things. And maybe this will help us to develop standards for training in cosmetic procedures. And we'll use the same standards we've been using to learn things in our residency programs. All right, there's a knowledge base, there's a skill set, and there's an execution component. Every single technical skill can be broken down into these 3 basic ingredients. And the amount of knowledge that's required may vary from procedure to procedure. Some may be more skill-based, and some may be more execution-based. But all of these components come into play when we learn a technical skill. Hubert Dreyfus is a professor at UC Berkeley, and he was commissioned by the U.S. Army for artificial intelligence research to write protocols, some of the protocols that are used in the drone technologies. So he had to break down skill set learning into a usable model. And I mentioned Dreyfus is because the Dreyfus model is the most popular model in use today to explain how people acquire technical proficiency, technical skill acquisition, and do it in a consistent way. So there are 5 levels in the Dreyfus model. And the names of the levels change, but I'm going to take the original nomenclature that he used. And he identified the novice. A novice operates by following strict rules, has no experience, and it's all or nothing. It's like throwing a switch. The skill is either executed or it's failed. There is no component of improvisation. It'd be like a first-year resident just following the commands of the senior staff to do this and do that. There's no gray. It's either black or white. So in some procedures, the novice cannot function. If the situation changes, it's still going to be black or white, and he's going to run into a fail or succeed kind of outcomes. The advanced beginner has a layer of experience, and that experience funnels back into execution. Execution creates more knowledge. Knowledge enhances skills. So an advanced beginner begins to develop situational awareness. My black and white rules have situations that allow these rules to be applied or not applied. So now there are shades of gray, and he begins to develop tactical knowledge, link together sets of technical skills in patterns that apply to situations. But it's not yet integrated into a complete package. This would be maybe a second-year resident. As you develop more experience, that creates more knowledge, more modification of skills, and more execution. Now that it's tailored, now you can develop strategies. So you can apply tactics in a global sense to address entire situations. This would be the level of a senior resident. And this is more or less the level that people come out of residency programs with. They have some degree of strategic knowledge. They have a lot of tactical knowledge. They have a skill set. But they're not complete. They either need to do fellowship, they need to work with somebody that's in practice, or they take their lumps and bumps and learn as they go along. But that's the most you can expect out of a residency program. That's the most we could expect out of any postgraduate training program, given the fact that over time you will improve. And then you become proficient. You don't have to think so much about the execution. You just react and you execute. Most of the skills of modifying situations are ingrained. And this is your person in practice for a couple of years, become proficient in techniques. He sees situations globally. He makes adjustments. She makes adjustments in ways that are not requiring a lot of thinking about the actual execution, but rather executing by more or less all of the ingrained knowledge. And then you have the expert. The expert doesn't play by rules. The expert has absorbed everything leading up to expertise. The expert writes rules to explain what he's doing and to explain why what he's doing works. So when you ask the old-fashioned master of the forceps to explain how do you do this, he has to back up and say, how do I do this? He has to break it up. Somebody has to watch and see what's being done and break it up into digestible steps that become the rules for the next round of learning. And so these are all the things we need to explore. But the target should not be the expertise right off the bat. It should be the same level as we send somebody out of an educational residency program with. So somewhere around the level of a competent or an advanced beginner is, something to be decided upon. It's not black and white, like everybody should be at the third level, but certainly the third level is going to produce better results than being at the more basic levels. And then how do we measure this? In a residency program, we have various components of measurement. We have the senior residents, we have the staff observing somebody on a tactical level, on a strategic level, on a skill set level. In private practice, look at a sling procedure, look at an ablation procedure, you go to a course, you do the procedure, and then you go implement it into practice. There's not a whole lot of oversight. beyond the weekend course. You know, given that you have a large background, it helps, you know, you're familiar with maneuvering in the anatomy, but even in our own specialty, we haven't defined what level of expertise, what level of skill acquisition is adequate for somebody learning new procedures. But let's look and see what our own specialty says. All right, to sit for the board exam, you need experience with 20 obstetrical cases, 20 GYN hospital surgical cases, and 40 office cases. So that's 80 procedures to encompass the entire specialty. So if we're talking about a single procedure, you know, to say you need 80 procedures of liposuction to be competent would be crazy, because you don't require that in your own specialty for a vaginal hysterectomy. You know, I could easily put in 19 D&Cs and one vaginal hyst, and I could sit for my boards. Probably. Look at the plastic surgeons. 50 surgical cases in a 9-month span to sit for the American board exam in plastic surgery. Of all the cases of all the possible surgical procedures in plastic surgery. It's not 50 lipos, not 50 breast augments, it's 50 of anything combined in a 9-month experience. And look at the American Academy of Cosmetic Surgery for fellowship. You need 50 aesthetic cases. Not 50 breast augments, 50 of any and all in combination, and you have to be boarded in a surgical specialty. So even in our own specialty, even in the other cosmetic specialties, nobody has decided how many procedures you need of a specific procedure, even though that would be the most logical approach if you're going to be providing specific procedures. Well, let's look at training. How are we doing on time? We good?
We're sort of running down.
All right, speak faster. All right, training resources that we have to begin with are transferable skills. What do we do right now that would help us to learn new procedures? We know how to study, and we have technical skills, which can be transferred to other procedures. Doing an abdominoplasty is identical to a cesarean to a certain degree, and that skill transfer bumps you up on the learning curve. Tactical skills. How do you handle a bleeder? In what sequence do you do this, this, and that? There's a lot of transfer to the tactical skills in one surgical situation to another. Passive skills. The literature. Anybody can read. Multimedia is getting better and better. Go out in the exhibit booths and they have all of this simulation learning that's just exploding. And then you have your didactic and interactive experiences, the lectures, workshops, and conferences, which are available on many different levels. But be careful. Okay, the vendors just want to sell equipment. They just want the commission. They'll sell you a piece of equipment. You'll be stuck making payments, and you'll learn how to use a machine. You will not learn how to do a procedure. So you have to be aware where the knowledge is coming from and what the motivation is. Active learning is the best, and you can get that through preceptorships, fellowships, and working with people one-on-one. And these are available to different degrees in different areas, but they're out there, and these are the best ways to learn. What do you need to have to start a cosmetic practice? You need malpractice coverage that covers what you're doing. You need to have your staff and your facility ready for these procedures. You have to be compliant with all regulations and know about all of the ethics involved, and you need to keep educating yourself. These are mandatory. For Botox and fillers, the knowledge base is pharmacology and a map of where to inject things, how to reverse an injection result. All right? It's not a long learning curve. I would say a weekend course is more than enough in this situation. Fillers, similar. There are different kinds of fillers. Some are absorbable, some are not absorbable. If you were smart, you would choose the ones that are reversible. If you make a mistake, you can reverse your mistake. Again, the knowledge base, pharmacological, allergic responses, how do you manage an allergy, how do you dissolve a filler, and how do you inject it? Very simple skills to learn, again, suited for a weekend type of a situation. Skin procedures. Well, they involve technology. So learning the technology is not difficult. And again, you have to learn, when do I apply it, how long do I apply it for, and what are my power settings? And that pretty much defines all of these machine-based skin treatments. Liposuction is a surgical skill that requires more on the skill level, knowledge of complications, and execution. So these come into play, requires more than a weekend course. A weekend course would be an introduction to something that might require 20, 30 cases. Abdominoplasty, the same thing. If you're familiar with laparotomy, you're familiar with all the skill set necessary to manage not only the abdominoplasty, but the complications of the abdominoplasty. Again, you have to learn it. You have to be experienced. You have to observe it. I would say another 20 cases for abdominoplasty. Breast augmentation, there are more techniques of breast augmentation than there are of abdominoplasty, so you have to be familiar with techniques, which techniques apply in which situations. So it's a broader base. You can learn a style of breast augmentation, but really you're not complete until you've learned various. So I would say it's a longer learning curve for breast augmentation, even though technically it's not a difficult operation. And then most importantly is picking the patients. You have to learn how to pick a cosmetic patient. This is where you make or break a perfect surgical result. You could have the best cosmetic result and the most dissatisfied patient if she has body dysmorphic disorder. She will never be happy. So you have to learn when to operate, when not to operate, and when to pass it off to someone else. And I think if you keep all of these elements in mind, you'll have a better understanding of what you're getting into when you're getting into cosmetic surgery. But like they say, the horse is already out of the barn. We are just trying to figure out what's the best way to embark on these procedures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Share this website and this blog and this podcast with the people in your life who you feel would benefit from this information.